is the DeFi Decoded podcast by 9 Point Partners. The ideas and opinions expressed in this podcast should not be taken as investment advice. Always consult with your financial advisor before investing.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of DeFi Decoded. I'm Alex Tapscott here with Andrew Young. A couple of weeks ago, we had Mark Greenberg, the MD for Kraken Canada, on the show to talk a little bit about how his business is thinking about the Canadian market. The Canadian market, by all accounts, is a very important one in crypto and in Web3. We have around 40 million people in this country, and all the data says that Canadians are as knowledgeable and as interested in this stuff as just about anybody in the entire world. And it's also an interesting market because it is related to the United States, but different in several key respects, not only because it's a different country, it's got different securities regulators, obviously, and sometimes it takes a different approach to the same issues. And it's in that difference that I really want to focus today's conversation to explore how countries like Canada can distinguish themselves from the States. And when it comes to building a country and the conditions for the industry to succeed, what concrete steps they're doing and how businesses are reacting to that. So today we have a perfect guest to complement that conversation with Mark. Dean Skurka is the president and CEO of WonderFi. Unlike Kraken, WonderFi is the largest Canadian exchange. It is the amalgamation, in fact, of several different platforms which came together relatively recently, and in a way sort of form a bulwark of sorts against foreign competition. Now, obviously, it's still very early in the market, and so our view on the show is not so much that companies necessarily compete, but that they're kind of growing the pie together. But clearly, there are customers out there, and everyone's vying for their attention and for their business. So, Dean, we've got you on the show to talk a little bit about your business and how you see the evolution of this market. But before we do that, why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself and how you came to get into this industry?
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks for having me, guys. I'm excited to be here. I took a chance on a little company called BitBuy back in January 2018 as one of the first 4 employees of that platform. At the time, I was focused primarily on finance and compliance, which, is much different than it looks today. Things that we take for granted, like bank accounts and compliance programs, were really at an early stage, and it was hard to find reliable banking partners, find platforms that had established and focused on regulatory compliance and putting in policies and procedures that were reflective of that. And so, from there, the journey really evolved. We were able to build BitBuy up into one of Canada's largest crypto trading platforms through a commitment to compliance, transparency, and good technology and service for our users. And that ultimately led to the sale of the business to WonderFi in March 2022. From there, I took over as CEO of WonderFi in November of last year, and we've really been focused on continuing to grow the business through acquisition. We've consolidated 4 of the 10 regulated crypto trading platforms in the country. Today, we have about 1.6 million users across the WonderFi ecosystem, with about $17 billion of trade processed in the last 5 years.
It's amazing. And what would you say is the split between like institutional and retail?
Yeah, it's come a long way. All of these platforms that we own and operate started off being completely focused on the retail market. Yeah. And platforms like CoinSquare and BitBuy have really committed to evolving their product and services to be able to service the growing demand from an institutional perspective. And so today, our volumes on the platform are about evenly split between what we call OTC and wealth and the retail platform that is self-directed.
Yeah, interesting. And one of the sort of themes that we're interested in is regulation, how governments are thinking about this kind of stuff. And I know that the Canadian, well, first of all, for our global listeners, unlike in the United States, which has one common securities regulator, we have securities regulators at the provincial level, but we also have an organization called the CRA that helps to sort of steward or shape the direction of regulation, though there's a lot of daylight between the different provinces. But anyway, the regulator here has come up with a framework for companies that, started a new industry where there wasn't really regulation. And then they said, okay, well, you got to get registered and here's how you're going to do it. But in the meantime, you can operate as a pre-registered business. Now, my understanding is that, WonderFi, because of the combination of these different parts, doesn't need to go through that process because it's already fully regulated and registered. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah. WonderFi acquired CoinSquare July of this year, and through that acquired the first and only CRO member that is a dealer specifically focused on the digital asset industry. And so, yeah, we think that really creates a strong regulatory moat around our business. From there, what we've put in place is a plan that will integrate all of our crypto trading activity from the various platforms we've acquired inside the dealer. And really from there, what we are able to do is focus on the products and services that we are enabled to offer through the licenses, as opposed to focusing on pre-registration undertakings or the licensing process in and of itself.
Yeah. So what does it allow you to do that everyone else can't, right? And I'm thinking specifically about like foreign competitors, because right now, as far as homegrown, crypto exchanges go, WonderFi, for all intents and purposes, is kind of the one, right? I mean, I don't know, even I know I am aware of a couple much smaller ones, but they're not really part of this discussion. I think what people want to understand is, okay, Kraken has a crypto native company that's been around for many years. It's well known amongst a certain kind of sector of the market, probably more sophisticated, larger, types of investors in this asset class. Then you got Coinbase, which is, has a big institutional business, but I think a lot of people think of it as like a big mass market brand. It's American. They're interested in the Canadian market, and they're all trying to vie for share and, and stake their claim. So the regulatory moat that you have, like define what allows you to do that others can't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think first and foremost, it adds a ton of credibility to the business and the platforms itself. I talk about earlier the growing presence of wealth, institutional volumes on the platform as a percentage of the totals. And a lot of that really does come down to the regulatory positioning that we do have. When you start to think of these larger players entering the space, a lot of them may be required to work with IIROC members exclusively, or have risk departments that would look far favorably on that than an offshore platform that may have significant scale, but does not have the regulatory licensing that other platforms like ours may have. And so we think from a credibility perspective and our ability to onboard those larger institutional clients, we think it's table stakes and will really allow us to continue to grow meaningful market share in that segment. When you talk about the longer term opportunity as it relates to the product roadmap, on the back of the licensing that we do have with Zero through CoinSquare, we believe there is a clear path for us to launch additional products and services that we're really excited about, that we think the market will really respond well to. I think the biggest two would likely be margin and derivatives products. We're in everything we do is with the full understanding of the regulators. We like to think of ourselves as working with them to roll out these products and services into the market. Staking is a very good example of that. BitBuy was able to work with its regulators to roll out one of the first of its kind staking licenses in November of last year, and we've seen really great response to that product. But doing so in a way that works with the regulators really creates that stability for the business, that when we launch a product, we can really commit to it and ensure that it's in market for the long term.
So that would be, sorry.
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh yeah. So I just on the margin and derivatives, would those be traditional futures products, which is sort of Coinbase started with those, or would those be more kind of like the crypto native perps, which I believe Coinbase launched very recently though through an offshore entity?
Yeah, I typically like to think of the path of least resistance here, and what is most relatable from a regulator's perspective, and what are we likely to get accomplished as a starting point with a view to over time, fine tuning that product to maybe look and feel more native to crypto users. So I think it would certainly be the former than the latter in that regard. But we look at these things as starting points. We want to get a product out there to really prove out the viability as a business, and at the same time demonstrate to the regulators that these products and services can exist in the market in a regulatory compliant manner that prioritizes investor protections. And so we believe in doing that, building up that credibility and the data, quite frankly, that these products can exist in a market in that fashion over time. We can look to things that might be a bit more, foreign to traditional regulators today.
Yeah, and one of those things that's probably I'm assuming is quite foreign to regulators, but some centralized exchanges have started to sort of dip their toes in a little bit, is sort of like what people are calling like the merger of DeFi and CeFi, or centralized exchanges. I think people call them CeDeFi, which is like it's kind of like allowing centralized exchanges to sort of get the yield of different DeFi products, but serve it to users in like a more compliant, or I guess more traditional format. And then there's also some projects like Coinbase, again, not to keep using them, but they've actually launched their own L2 with their own sort of DeFi ecosystem. So I'm just kind of curious if obviously we're DeFi Decoded, so we're always interested in the DeFi angle. Is that something you guys are looking into as well? And I guess in sort of like what angle?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think we're always looking at what exists in the DeFi market to see trends and products and services that are being developed that are really getting traction and product market fit. When we sort of step back and originally thought about this, we thought yield is one of the key benefits to a user in DeFi. And we understand certainly in the regulatory environment that we're in, with needless examples of centralized platforms that sort of developed unsustainable business models around yield. Think of the BlockFi's and the Voyagers and the Celsiuses. We really had to think of, like, again, what was a starting point for us, and what could we actually bring to market in terms of yield. And that's sort of what drove forward the staking opportunity for us from a product perspective. We knew we had to do something. We had a feeling, you start talking about looking at different protocols and becoming an aggregator of protocols. There is a ton of risk embedded in that, and a lot of knowledge, I'd say, that's required to really bridge the gap between someone like yourself or someone myself that understands the industry, and obviously regulators that have limited exposure to these markets. And so like I said, we think staking is really our first step into being able to offer our clients yield. Anything we look at in the future obviously would require that regulatory approval. But we definitely see a world where the market matures, and as some of these protocols mature with it, some of these opportunities should make themselves available to a regulatory compliant exchange like ours. The one thing we're really mindful of with regulators is the idea of, take staking, for example. If the regulators in Canada don't provide clear guidance and regulation around how platforms like ours can offer staking, it's not as if Canadian participants are just not going to stake entirely. They will find access to these opportunities and these products and services wherever they can. And a lot of the times that'll end up being offshore on these platforms with limited licensing, unclear jurisdiction. And what that really does is put the Canadian user in a very vulnerable state where they have little to no recourse in the event things go wrong. And so we're very much mindful of that. And we believe, staking is an example that the regulators are as well. And so, our goal is to bring, the products and services that crypto users want onto our platform in a regulatory compliant manner that keeps this activity not only in Canada, but at the same time, really protects the users in Canada from engaging in offshore platforms that may put higher risk on them than those that are not only regulated, but regulated here in Canada.
Yeah, it's so interesting to talk about the bridge between the centralized exchange and the wider world of like Web3. And I think of so many of these different emerging fields, whether it's DeFi, where you can access a range of financial services, including earning yield, or if it's gaming, where you can participate in virtual worlds and games and own assets, or if it's NFTs, where you're like collecting art and collectibles or whatever. And for a lot of people, it seems like there's a real need for like an on-ramp, or almost like a partner to explore those worlds, rather than kind of going all in on doing it all from a self-custody perspective and so forth. And I often think about, like, I don't know what the right analogy is for for that. Maybe it's on ramp, maybe it's partner, right? Like your partner in DeFi, but it's not so much that like WonderFi and others are offering DeFi services through the platform per se. It's that they're acting as an enabler for you to like access the wider world, and to do so in a way where you have some comfort with the business because it's regulated, and that they've got proper procedures and so forth. To me, like I feel like that's a very natural role and a real necessity for the foreseeable future, so long as people need to on ramp into this industry, right? It's almost like before there was a web browser, there was a way to access the World Wide Web, but it was much more difficult. And you needed a kind of a tool of sorts. I don't know if that's the exact analogy, but like I think it's definitely a clear role, right? And I see that as like a big growth opportunity.
Yeah, well, it's a obviously long debated topic is what is the role of a centralized exchange as decentralized exchanges become more user friendly and more I guess similar in the way they function, and could potentially reach a broader audience. To your point, I don't know if there is a time in the near future where decentralized exchanges replace centralized exchanges like the platforms we operate. Really, I think about the beginners, the first time participants that are continually coming into the space from a variety of different channels. The lift for those users to go sign up for a MetaMask wallet and for them to just immediately interact with decentralized platforms, I just don't think that user experience gap has been bridged quite that far yet, or maybe in the near term. To your point, I think it's more, how do they coexist? I think of platforms like ours and our ability to easily onboard those first-time participants, these new entrants, and offer this seamless experience where they can interact with the traditional systems they're used to, their bank accounts, and easily convert fiat to crypto and vice versa. We really think that's like the integral key starting point for any beginner to have a real seamless experience to start the journey. From there, we see our users understanding, learning more. Really, for anyone that's interested in the asset class or the industry, I usually just encourage them to buy $100 worth or a few $100 worth. Naturally, from there, you start to learn more, have more of a vested interest, educate yourself on the differences between perhaps Bitcoin, Ethereum, and other layer twos. And perhaps through that process, end up at a point in time where you're comfortable with a MetaMask wallet or custodying your own Bitcoin through a cold storage setup, interacting with DeFi protocols, buying NFTs. And so we really think that it's the start of the journey. And we think they play a really important role in the overall ecosystem. I don't really look at it as one or the other, truthfully, not at this point in time.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I mean, I think it's all kind of coming together, at once. Yeah. So what does the future look like for Canada as a whole when it comes to this stuff? I know there was a report in the House of Commons sort of outlining some broad facts and recommendations for how the industry should proceed. Like we talk a little bit on the show about, there's like clear rules of the road, and regulations are good, but they're sort of table stakes. If you want to actually embrace these tools and make them, important in Canada, not just as a way for people to buy and sell assets, which is obviously important, but as a way to build new applications and companies and projects that could, create wealth and jobs and make the country an innovation hub. Like, how do you think we're doing in that regard?
Like in terms of the regulatory compliance would be largely table stakes, and for buying and selling digital assets, I think it's important to realize from a regulatory perspective that buying and selling digital assets is one component of this industry. And it's really about, like we've talked about, embracing those other areas of growth, DeFi being a core piece of that broader ecosystem. And so I think Canada's done a good job of being early in terms of regulating the crypto trading platforms. I think Canada's also demonstrated that they realize there's an industry beyond buying and selling digital assets, as evidenced by the staking licenses that have been issued since November of last year. And, what we would really like to see is that continued evolution. In my view, margin and derivatives are those two next integral products that will really add a lot of value and credibility to the Canadian regulated market. And, really demonstrating that to the regulators, and demonstrating to them how platforms like ours can offer these products and services in a regulatory compliant manner, we really would expect and hope that they would embrace that and work with us to find that balance and launch those products in market, because we do believe they will be quite meaningful to the broader Canadian ecosystem. And then, to your other point, in terms of how do you promote the industry, how do you promote new businesses and, new ideas within the industry? I think that's an important question too. My unfortunate sense, and there isn't a ton of startup activity in the Canadian crypto industry, new ideas coming out. You look at the Futures Conference, I believe all of us were just at. It's a lot of the same names, it's a lot of the same businesses. So how do we support that next generation of entrepreneurs to really build those products and services in Canada that could really benefit the broader economy? And that's something I think about. I don't know if I have all of the answers or any of them, but I think that's an important piece to consider as well.
Yeah, I think just to go back real quick on the sort of like the derivatives and the perps, in a lot of ways, by those products not being sort of allowed in Canada, it sort of ties the local companies like you guys, like your hands behind your back, because those are like typically the most profitable segments of like a traditional crypto exchange, as well as the most liquid. If you look at Binance, their perps and derivatives do about 10x the volume that the spot market does. And so if you don't allow that to be done in like a compliant way through a trusted brand like WonderFi or BitBuy, you're sort of forcing users to do some of their most profitable and most liquidity generating activities offshore, which just hurts like local companies and kind of prevents them from sort of competing internationally. So I think it's not even just by not allowing, like it's quite harmful to not allow those to be. And obviously you want to do them in the right way. But I mean, like we've seen that in the US where some products, like you said, users just go offshore. And so I think that would be a big unlock for a lot of the Canadian, because that is kind of like as like a power user of crypto, like that is kind of one of the missing pieces, and forces you to use like certain DeFi products which don't really have all the same features that like a centralized exchange does. Yeah. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I guess one other thing, like we talk a lot on the show about sort of this like the multi-chain thesis. So about how initially sort of we'll call it smart contracts 1.0, all the activity was on Ethereum, and then we're sort of in the maybe end of the second era where people have been using these faster L1s, things like Solana, Polygon, all these different chains. And it seems like we're really heading into this third era where more and more applications are moving towards L2s or building their own application chains using things like Cosmos. How do you guys think about that, just from like, I guess both from the exchange perspective, but then also from this sort of unique staking product that you guys have? Obviously the complexity increases dramatically as we go from 5 chains to 50 or 500. I'm just kind of curious, how do you guys think about that from an exchange, just in terms of like broadening coverage of the tokens that you can trade on the platform, and then also just the tokens you can stake? I guess specifically, like what ecosystems are you excited about sort of exploring?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think in terms of multi-chain support from a trading platform perspective, you'd want to be mindful of being able to provide support for as many chains as possible. And, you look at some of the larger platforms, that embrace that early. I think, that's been impactful in a lot of ways. And so for us, we look at, obviously all of the capabilities that we have available to our custodians, but obviously super mindful of, the multi-chain support that we can offer from a withdrawal deposit perspective to those users for the coins that we do offer. So we think that is a integral part that an exchange can offer in terms of offering those capabilities to its users. In terms of staking, it's a great question, because it's going to become a very crowded market as these proof of stake assets just continue to flood the market. And so from our perspective, we want to balance being able to offer our clients as many assets as possible, to be able to stake and to take advantage of the offerings of proof of stake. But at the same time, we want to be able to ensure that those tokens and those offerings really meet the criteria of our platforms more broadly and don't impose any real risks on our users or otherwise. And so, I think there's no straight line test here, but really, we look at staking as a really key area for us for long-term growth. We believe that commitment will really pay off. It is a very important product for us overall. And with that being said, we want to be able to ensure that our clients can stake the assets that they hold, as needed through the BitFi platform or through our other platforms. And so, I think it's definitely an important evolution. I think what you'll likely see is, a significant increase in the assets that can be staked. And, that's really where I believe platforms like ours can step in and provide that diligence and that, sort of frontline defense, if you will, from the public or the retail user, and really diligencing some of these products to understand, which ones are, worth offering or not. But, it's definitely something we're really committed to and really excited with the growth and traction we've seen with the product this year.
Yeah, it's interesting. What do you think of stable coins, and specifically like Canadian dollar stablecoin as an area of innovation, like for Canadian exchange? Because like we've seen how stable coins have become enormously popular, and like Coinbase is a company that through its partnership with Circle has done well there, and Tether and the rest. And I'm just wondering, like, what is your view on it for the business and just in general, especially as it relates to Canadian dollar stablecoin?
Yeah, it's interesting, and it's obviously something that has been worked on in the past and continues to be worked on. I think my one question or concern, all the way through has just been like, where is the real demand for a Canadian dollar stablecoin, and is there enough demand to really support that as a business long term? You think about US dollar stablecoin and all the different use cases it has. It all really drives from the fact that there's real demand for US dollars on a pretty consistent basis.
Right. And there's no demand for Canadian dollars. Or at least outside Canada, there's obviously
not to the same extent for sure. And so, you think about the use case, and perhaps there's utility or benefit to a certain segment of our users, or maybe a small percentage of people that would use it to transmit Canadian dollars. But to me, that's just sort of the one big question, is where the demand is driven from. Longer term, I don't think it would be too surprising to see, guys like Circle, start to develop, local stable currencies or FX services that sort of effectively recreate that offering.
Yeah.
But, as a standalone entity in the Canadian market, I would just be mindful of the business model and whether or not there would be enough dollars to convert into stable coins to support that business. But I do think if someone is able to unlock that opportunity in a unique way, that could be a meaningful opportunity for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. It's one of those things where, that could be a solution in search of a problem. Like I think about the Canadian market for like dollar transfers, and we have Interac for up to 10K or whatever, for sort of retail transactions. I suppose that there's probably something at the business level that could be used, rather than wires, if there was or like large dollar volume. If you had to move 50,000 Canadian dollars between two people, this could be an easy way of doing it, but that seems like a subsegment of the market. Yeah, I'm always just trying to think of like what are planes of innovation, like new frontiers for innovation for platforms like yourself, which are have, like, as you've pointed out, 17 billion in transaction volume, the largest customer base in Canada, and the only one that's fully regulated. It's like, what else could you do with that, right? And at such an early stage in a new market, in a new industry with a new emerging market, I just think it's exciting. So, Dean, we're looking forward to seeing what comes next, and I know you'll also be joining me on the Web3 book tour. So, people who are interested in that, if you're listening in from like Calgary, Vancouver, or Montreal, those are the remaining Canadian tour dates left. Come hear from Dean and myself. You can find out more at web3booktour.com. Until then, that's it for DeFi Decoded. This is Alex Tapscott. Have a great rest of your week. We'll see you next time. Take care.
The information contained herein does not constitute an offer or solicitation by anyone in the United States or in any other jurisdiction in which such an offer or solicitation is not authorized, or to any person to whom it is unlawful to make such an offer or solicitation. Prospective investors who are not residents in Canada should contact their financial advisor to determine whether securities of the funds may be lawfully sold in their jurisdiction.